can mute themselves if they're not on, if they're not speaking, that would be really helpful, because we can hear a bit of chat in the background that I know is not deliberate. If everyone can turn their camera on, if they're up for that, that's really good, because then it's, if you're a speaker, when the eyebrows go up, you know you've said something quite radical. So it's good to, and smiles show that somebody agrees with what you're saying. So it's really good. I hope everybody's okay about the main event being recorded. And that's just to make sure so that we can use all the really good comments that I think we're going to get this afternoon. And the CPA are also going to put the footage on a YouTube channel. So it means that if you or any of your colleagues want to watch it again, or you want to share it with colleagues and talk about how it's any issues you want to follow up, you'll be able to access that on YouTube. So that should be really good. So we're only a minute late, hopefully, and I am going to introduce our first speaker today. And that's going to be, oh, we've now got everybody else's screen. You've now got the official opening pages. And I'm really delighted to introduce the Honourable Michelle Slack, who's the President of the Nevis Island Assembly. She was appointed President of the Assembly in January this year, and she's a former Achieving Scholar and a CPA Commonwealth Youth Parliamentarian. So it does show that if you actually attend these events, exciting things can happen in the future. No pressure to everybody. So again, thanks to the CPA and the School of International Futures, I'm going to hand over to Michelle, and she's going to introduce why this agenda is so important to her and to her country. So very looking forward to hearing from you today. So over to you.
Thank you for that introduction, Sarah. And I am so grateful to the Commonwealth Parliamentary Association and the School of International Futures for the invitation. I am delighted to be able to share with all of you on the topic that we have for our roundtable this morning, or it's morning for me in my part of the world, or afternoon for some of you. So I want to share this experience we had on the adjournment of a recent sitting of the Nevis Island Assembly just about 2 weeks ago. And we had MPs who rose to express their congratulations to students across the island who had graduated from preschool or primary school. And 2 MPs had children graduating from preschool and 1 from primary school. They both expressed words of congratulations to their children. Following these remarks, another MP arose and he joined in expressing congratulations to the graduates, then stated laughingly that he knew it was time for his departure when parliamentary colleagues had children graduating from preschool and primary school, while his children were ready to have children of their own. And the assembly joined in laughter. This light moment in the assembly was actually a significant one, as it is suggestive of an appreciation of the importance of youth representation in Parliament. In Nevis, youths account for a significant proportion of the population. Currently, the Nevis Island Assembly is constituted of 25% of MPs under the age of 35. In the period 2017 to 2021, this number was 0. And while we're on the topic of representation, female presence in the Nevis Island Assembly also increased in recent time, from 12.5% in 2013 to 25% in 2017, and currently stands at 50%. These statistics signal steps in the right direction in ensuring representation in the political arena and in ensuring that decisions affecting the wide cross-section of society are made by persons who are part of the affected groups, rather than the traditional male hegemonic approaches, which largely saw a small group of senior men making decisions which affected all, including women and young people, and occasionally on issues that were specific to those groups. The involvement of young people is critical, in my view, to ensuring that decisions are made and policies are implemented which are best suited for the intended target groups, and to foster greater interest among young people in the political sphere. But there are some things that are necessary for this. Education, exposure, and consultation are necessary. As a former youth parliamentarian, as was mentioned before, I was exposed to the roles and functions of Parliament and lawmaking from an early age. At that time, I had no clue I would years later be sitting as the president of the Assembly. And now, with greater appreciation and awareness of its importance, the added duty of ensuring a continuing, vibrant youth parliament in Nevis, perhaps where there are future generations of MPs and speakers or presidents at the moment. Consultation is also essential. For us in Nevis, this would require a revival of our Youth Council as a non-partisan body to advocate for and incorporate the views of young people in the national dialogue. But the future is us, and engagement must begin in the present. And I would hope that we would continue as young people to trample stereotypical ideologies that disqualify young people because of a negative association between youth and inexperience, and instead elevate the discourse to focus on the unique perspectives, the innovation and exuberance that attend youth involvement in politics. And these are the brief words I would just want to share with all of you to get the conversation going. I want to thank you again for your time, and I hope that these words will draw or give some inspiration for you as we continue to discuss. Thank you again.
Thank you. That was a fantastic start to our event today. And those points you make about education, exposure, consultation, wanting to involve young people is really, really important. And the fact that you have now made it to your current position and are still committed, I think speaks volumes. So thank you for that. And also thank you so much for sticking to time. Anyone else who's going to be speaking next, please try and keep to time so we can get everybody in. Our next speaker today is going to be Senator Ledama Olekina of Narok County in Kenya. And he has been elected in 2017, and he's since become one of the most high-profile Maasai politicians in the country. Outside of politics, he's the founder of the Maasai Education Discovery, an education centre for girls. So I think that makes a nice point that it's about young people. It's also making sure that we have gender equality and the progress we need to see. So that is fantastic. And I'm really looking forward to hearing Senator Olekina talk about why this agenda is so important to him and his country. Over to you.
Thank you, Sarah, and thank you, everyone. And let me just begin by congratulating all of you for taking this agenda very seriously. One of my biggest pet peeves is the youth being involved in matters that determines their future when they're actually being lied to. The biggest problem we have in Africa at the moment is corruption. And this corruption is going to destroy the future of the African continent, the future of future generations. And there's a really important need for us as legislators to begin working on developing laws that will protect the future generation. Our biggest problem is a debt crisis in Africa. The future generation will be forced to pay for what they have no idea why this debt was necessary to be taken in the first place. We have a very big challenge, and like what Michelle talked about, the women representation and the youth representation in our island. In our country, it's a really very, very different and very challenging task, because what it entails is that it depends on who has the money. Money in our country is what determines who becomes a leader. And once they become leaders, the first thing that we do as politicians is that we develop legislations that encourages us to take our entire salary, in advance. Like, for instance, in Kenya today, a member of parliament can be able to get a mortgage, which is about 35 million shillings, so about $350,000 before. and then take another mortgage to buy a car, which is about $70,000. If you combine that, that is the entire salary of that legislator for the first 5 years that he will be in office. So when that legislator is there, he's not really focusing on trying to develop legislation for future generation. He's only focusing on passing legislation that will be able to assist him or her to be able to line his pocket. So I think it is important now that we set everything aside and we recognize that the generations that came before us played a critical role in making sure that we found a good country or good countries that can be able to help us, perform our daily task. It now behooves us to be able to prepare laws and to have conversation that will ensure that we get to that level of the Nevis Island where 50% of women can be represented, so that women can be able to articulate their own issues. The youth can also be represented. Today, we have a law in Kenya as an example, that the only women who are represented in parliament are either nominated, special elect. But if you look at our constitution in Kenya, that special elect, particularly in the Senate where I'm the majority and the minority whip, they have no vote. So they're only there to enrich debate, but never to really vote when it comes to the time for them to make decisions that will affect their lives. So I think it's important for us to look at what is actually happening now and what impact will it have for future generations. Another big problem that we currently have, as I finish, has to do with global warming. We know in the southern Europe, people are burning. That problem has been in existence in Africa. I've been having a lot of huge droughts. Like last year, my own community of the Maasai, our entire economy was decimated because we destroyed our forest. So I think if we start destroying the forest now, what will happen for future generations to come? They will not be able to have any economy. So I think it is important that we engage ourselves and being very practical and ensuring that whichever agreements are reached between international communities and local assemblies or local governments, legislations or treaties that will be able to guarantee the future generation that they will be able to find a country or countries that they can be able to also prepare for the next generation that will come after them. Thank you very much, Sarah.
Thank you so much for that. Again, really to the point, that importance of having women not just allowed to be in the room, but having the equality of being allowed to vote, not just to speak, and the importance of young people. And I think the points made there about accountable democracies, transparency, and good government, these points are well made. And I'm glad you finished on the importance of climate change, because that has to be one of our key issues. It's a now issue. It's not an issue for the future. We have a responsibility to the future generations as parliamentarians. And I think goes back to the points made about involving young people in our democracies is critical. So thank you so much. That has been a really good overview from both Michelle and Ladama to the start of today. And we're moving to the main body of the event. And I'm delighted to introduce Kat Tully. She's the director of the School of International Futures, who are the co-organisers of today's event. And she's going to set out what are the recent developments at national and multinational level that we need to think about. And you can see from that slide, she has really important expertise that I think we're going to enjoy listening to today. So over to you.
Well, thank you so much for everyone, and thank you for joining. But in particular, I'd like to thank the two earlier speakers for such a powerful articulation on the importance of representation, some of the challenges around the incentives facing that representation of future generations nowadays, but also really connecting this conversation to issues in the here and the now. This is about climate change, it's about debt, it's about issues around food security. And I think that's a very powerful point from which to start. So I'd like to spend just 3 minutes, 4 minutes really outlining why is it that 2023 is the year to look at future generations and looking at issues around parliamentarians and youth working together as a solution to bringing those interests of future generations into policy making today, and perhaps hopefully leave you with some ideas to inspire you of what's happening internationally. So I'll start off by saying that today is still the high-level political forum where the Sustainable Development Goal framework is being talked about in New York, which is around how do we turbocharge that commitment to future generations as well as current generations to a 2030 future that is peaceful, secure, and leaves no one left behind. And I wanted to underline that in the zero draft of the agreement that's going to be signed at UNGA in September at the SDG summit, that focus on youth and parliamentarians is very squarely there. And that's extremely important. It's also the year of youth in terms of the Commonwealth. And what we're seeing internationally is that we realize that business as usual is not going to cut it. We cannot continue to do what we've been doing in the last 7 years, since 2015 when the SDG framework was signed, and expect to achieve those goals that we've set ourselves. We need to do something different. We need to face those transitions ahead. We need to reflect the interests of future generations. And the opportunity is that in the year from the SDG summit to the Summit of the Future that is going to be taking place in 2024, there are a series of commitments from people like you working at the country and international and regional level, thinking about how do we do this differently. So at the multilateral level, what the UN Secretary General is proposing on the next slide is a really interesting set of ideas that I think can be applied at the national level. In terms of parliamentarians, there's a special envoy to scrutinize legislation and decisions and spending on which generations are benefiting and which aren't from these decisions, integrating foresight and looking around trends in the body and the functioning of the civil service. So I know that many parliaments are beginning to look at how do you integrate that into the work of the clerks and into the scrutiny work of the select committees, especially the investment ones. And then there's a declaration globally to define and identify the duties for future generations. And then you've got other countries like Wales, for example, that has actually put in legislation a right to future generations. So has Bolivia and other countries. And then there's a commission, a forum of the General Assembly that is actually going to be dedicated to it. But I'll also underline that youth engagement, the new Undersecretary General role and office, and also the importance of national listening exercises is an absolutely key part of what people are going to be campaigning and working on over the next year. So I guess as I complete my opening remarks, I just want to kind of say that you are in community, whether you're interested in well-being of future generations, perhaps national security, whether it's anticipatory governance, whatever lens you want to have to look at the future of your country in a way that is true to future citizens as well as current citizens, there are really inspiring stories of what governance innovations can take place in parliaments and then across governments with citizens, often spearheaded with youth, to actually make that happen. And that's from new and enhanced structures within Parliament, like committees of the future, commissioners for future generations or legislation. Again, Wales, Finland do some very interesting examples, but we're seeing informal caucuses arise, including in Kenya. National dialogues, whether it's in the Caymans, as the representative from Nevis mentioned, and also New Zealand looking at long-term insights briefing, the way of bringing citizens and parliamentarians to talk about the future and scrutinize the legislation for their impact on young people is really powerful. You're seeing really interesting collaborations across regional bodies. The OSCE Parliamentarian Assembly has now got a special rapporteur for future generations, but the Commonwealth is clearly a space for this to kind of lean into, as well as a global summit of committees of the future where the parliamentary committees are going to meet up for the second time ever in Montevideo in September. And I think, and this is perhaps preambling a little bit what we'll be spending some of the rest of today talking about, there's a high ambition version of this, which is the Parliament, youth, legislature, but also the executive and civil servants working together on national listening exercises and shaping that future agenda together, called the National Strategy for Next Generation. So I hope that I've given you a little bit of the excitement that is out there. There's huge amounts of entrepreneurs like yourself committed to making change happen in your governments. And so I'll leave that to you to discuss, and look forward to hearing about what's happening in your countries too. Thank you very much, Sarah.
That was an excellent oversight, because it shows that actually a lot of our parliaments are now not just thinking about this issue, but they're acting, they're putting in structures, accountability, and they're working with governments to influence how they make their decisions, how they spend their money, and what legislation they pass. So that's really useful structurally. I think the other thing that is good is to demonstrate to young people that they are being listened to, and then to go back and saying, what changes have we made? So that was a really good overview. Our next speaker, I'm delighted to introduce today, is actually going to be a member of the Commonwealth Youth Parliament, and it is Bibi Wazida. She served as a youth parliamentarian in Guyana's parliament in 2021 and 2022, and she represented Guyana in the 11th annual CPA Commonwealth Youth Parliament. So no pressure. It's really good to have somebody who's a young person on our call, who's an official speaker, and very keen to hear your perspectives and reflections from your colleagues in the Commonwealth Youth Parliament. So over to you, Bibi.
Thank you very much. I must say good morning, everyone, while it's morning over here. So good morning. And for those of you that is having evening, good afternoon. I must thank the CPA board members for this opportunity to share my experience as a youth parliamentarian. So in Guyana, our youths are represented on a large scale, and youths are generally involved in policy making in our country via the use of our youth parliament that is held annually. Our youths all across the regions are involved in this youth parliament, so that gives a large scope of the youths to be involved. Our youth parliament help you to not only understand good governance, but also good parliamentary practice, which is very much important. Additionally, we also have a robust Ministry of Culture, Youth and Sports that focus primarily on our youth involvement, improvement, and they make representation and also grant our youth equal opportunities. Now, as a past youth parliamentarian, I must say it's a platform that allowed me to highlight regional and international challenges. These challenges I highlighted would have fostered policymakers to shift their views and recognize that youths are experiencing challenges as well. In Guyana, I must say our parliament is made up of 65 members, and about 20% are youths, so are within the youth frame. So a lot of discussions are ongoing about youth involvement and improvement. Also, in terms of gender equality, it's very much adopted in our parliament, and that coincides with equal opportunities. Our policymakers also invest heavily in our education sector to ensure that our youths are equipped with additional skills and academics, so that in the future, especially in our oil and gas industry, which is very new to us, in the future, we can have more youths that are employed within this sector. And I must say that Youth Parliament is a great opportunity for youths to highlight issues and for them to raise their perspectives, and for policymakers to take these up and create projects that will help youths. And that is all I have to say. And I must thank the CPA board members for this opportunity. Thank you.
Oops, that was super. And again, you kept time. And do you know what also came across, Bibi, is you're not just taking part in those discussions, you're actually beginning to lead those discussions. And you will also be developing skills and confidence. And we want all young people to have those opportunities so they can represent themselves. I think that was the good governance and parliamentary practice really good to highlight how young people should influence those. So we've had some really good opening speakers to set the frame today, whether it's morning, afternoon, or indeed evening. Our next trick is going to be, we're going to let everybody involve themselves in this discussion. And we're going to go into breakout rooms. And these are our two topics that we're going to ask you to have a look at. What's happening in Commonwealth nations on this topic? And what should the future look like? What changes do you want to make? Each group, you're going to be allocated into a group, so don't worry, you'll just suddenly be in a group. Each group needs a report, somebody to report back so that you can sum up what your answers to those two questions are. So that's really important, and also introduce who you are in your group. So I think we're now going to just move into our groups. The technology will work here. Yep, so just click the join, all of us back. I have to say that in our group, although there's only 6 of us, we only managed to get some of us in to answer the first question. So it was a fast 10 minutes. So who would like to start? I don't know how many groups we had, but what about group 1? Somebody like to give us feedback? Did somebody volunteer in group 1? Okay, I'm going to move on to group 2 while group 1 can think about it and somebody can come back in. Group 2, what were your answers to the questions?
Thank you, Sarah. I'll just invite Ella if you would like to please share back a couple of highlights.
Sure. Well, for me, it was really helpful hearing from Senator Ladama. Yeah. It was really helpful hearing particularly about the youths, what's going on in Kenya. Particularly, I think, issues that are impacting Commonwealth and just many countries across the world at the minute. It's the cost of living crisis, and particularly just financial and wealth inequality overall. So in the UK, I've noticed that's really impacting people's education, how can young people focus on even thinking they can make a change when they're too worried about what they're going to eat, where they're going to live, if they can afford their rent, and so on. And then particularly what I heard in Kenya is going on is that it's also dictating how young people are then going with their political views, and the kind of overall view that young people just need to amass as much wealth as possible in order to succeed in life. And I think that's perhaps an issue that we're seeing everywhere in the world as well. We then touched upon climate change as well, particularly in terms of carbon tax. And perhaps going forward, it would be very beneficial to ensure that what's going on in the UK can then be replicated elsewhere, to make sure that if a company said that they're not allowed to perform certain things in the UK, they're not just coming to Africa, for example, and thinking we'll be able to get away with that there. And then lastly, we touched upon greenwashing, which I think is really impacting young people's views as well on climate change, and I imagine the older generations too. So if a company is saying we're doing this to achieve climate change, and perhaps some of the promises aren't actually coming to fruition, young people will go, oh, well, great, they're doing something about it. And actually, perhaps the reality is not so accurate.
Thank you, Ellie. You covered a lot there. That was really good. Group 3. Sorry, that was group 3, wasn't it?
I think that was group 2. I think that I was in group 3, and I was wondering if Tulenji maybe would mind sharing back. I'm conscious that PC had a lot of really interesting observations. You could try and capture some of them, but then contrast them with yours. That would be really useful because they worked well together, I felt.
I'm not sure I'll be able to like bring everything together.
Sorry to put you on the spot. No pressure, you know.
Yeah, I'll maybe highlight something on the point that I brought forward, but I don't think I'll be able to do justice to some of the wonderful points that I brought before mine. But I think for me, I was just bringing forward the thought that youth participation in Parliament in the context of Zambia. I come from Zambia. I have felt that it has been that bringing young people into the parliamentary space mostly has been in the view of silencing young people who are doing quite well and doing really focused and passionate projects before they were elected into parliament. And I felt like sometimes some of these leaders, they feel very threatened with what young people sometimes are doing. And they find ways of trying to, either silencing them or putting them in a space where they can't effectively do their advocacy. And for me, that's what I thought. And that's my concern, especially coming from the context that I come from. Yeah, that's the concern that I was trying to share in the group. Yeah, maybe PC can come forward and also talk about your own perspective.
Cheers, thank you. I just keep it short. And I really love your perspective in terms of, I think part of it is tokenism and also depowering a lot of young people who have influence. And we see that, I've seen that in my own experiences before. But I think one of the points that I made is that when given the opportunities to sort of put young people as well in decision-making positions, and so not just in parliaments but also across boards, and to keep track of what is happening nationally. Sometimes we find that society is not ready to take that next step, so they will sort of canvass our support, they will canvass for our ideas, but they won't have us around the decision-making table. And I use the experience in Barbados where, for instance, when the government with the majority tried to lower the age of representation in the Senate from 21 years old to 18 years old, the Senate actually refused to pass that legislation. They actually voted against it and missed a good opportunity to sort of empower young people on a more national scale, especially in a country which have a sort of a mature political system.
That was really good double act there, thank you. And highlighting challenges, and that leads us nicely into group 4. And I think, Alimi, you were going to feedback from group 4?
Yes, thank you, Sarah. Yeah, we were really, surprised by the time it flew quickly. So we discussed, some kind of, acceptance in Malaysia of youth leadership for future changes. And, effort has been tremendous over there. And in Philippines, we noticed that, improvement had been in, terms of, fighting drugs and drug abuse. And if I missed something, Jerome, kindly come in to make some corrections there. Yeah. Is that okay?
Yeah, okay. Excellent. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Then.
Okay, so I've shared a while ago about the Philippines on the current status of human rights, particularly during the term of the Duterte, when drug abuses has been faced by ordinary people in the Philippines. Also, one of the highlight of our country is that the son of the dictator is again seated in the presidency. There, go Alimi.
All right, thank you. Yeah, thank you, Jerome. Yeah, and we also cover issues in Nigeria where there is a kind of exclusion of the youth. Particularly, we came out of presidential election, and it has been the kind of the youth against the elderly people. There was a kind of great divide. We are trying hard here in Nigeria to find a space to express ourselves. If you can remember, two years ago, Twitter was banned, in Nigeria, because that was a space that allows us to express ourselves. So we are having some difficult challenges as youth to, come out, and, there is a kind of, shrinking space for us in the country. So we hope to have some example from, Yasin, Bibi Yasin, to, build a collaboration, because I noticed she mentioned, good parliamentarian practice and good governance. I think these are things that we need to, learn from them, so that Nigeria can be a better country for present generation and also future generation. Thank you.
Thank you, Alimi. You both covered some really good stuff there. Now, number 1, I think we've got Baz is going to answer for number 1.
Yep. So yeah, the time flew by as well for us, but the main topics that we covered were specifically with regards to setting up youth parliaments in every single Commonwealth country. So the example that was given was St. Helena, and we talked about setting them up in every country, making sure that the youth are always involved in future decision making, having them on futures councils. Another factor that we focused on were school visits, making sure that from a young age, children and young adults are aware of democratic processes and legislative processes, because it can be quite daunting to really understand all the background work that goes behind policy making. And with specifically to the UK, for example, I gave the example that a lot of the time the youth has felt neglected by older, experienced policymakers, and that they haven't felt that they have a role to play. And so in the future, we need to really work closely with them and give them this idea that they don't have their role to play 10 or 15 years down the line, but actually they can play it now. And it's of the utmost important that they in fact do so. I don't know if anyone else has anything to add from our group, but I think those were the main points that we kind of covered.
Could I invite perhaps very quickly, there was from St Helena, there was a commissioner for older people, and I think it was the juxtaposition of the commissioner for children and older people that was such a valuable, interesting insight around intergenerational solidarity on this point.
What? Yes, sure. So hi, I'm Julie Brooks, and I am actually the champion for older persons, which is people from 65 years up.
Rosie?
Oh, hi, and I'm Rosie Banku, and I'm the champion for the younger children, yes, for the youth.
And I would.
Well, we've got project.
I think they just. I think how you'll see it across the media. Oh, okay. So I think it's really important, as I said, as an older person's champion, though, to be in part very much involved with how the youth parliament's been set up. And as I said, Councillor Rosie and Rob here. But because we have an aging demographics, which means it's really important that we engage with the youth to have them on board for our future. So that's quite important to us.
Yes, and I think Baz, thank you, he said it quite clearly that we are just in the midst of trying to set up on the youth parliament, and we're about to educate our children on parliament and legislation and the legislative council and what we currently do, and try to kind of get them embraced into this and geared up or kind of focusing into this, so they won't be so taken aback on everything and making it friendly for them.
That's a really good perspective. Thanks for that. We're having that discussion in our parliament. Should we have an older person's commissioner? And we've got a younger person's commissioner already. So it's that intergenerational. Is everybody at the table? And what are the differences? And what change do we need to make? And the other thing I would mention is in our parliament in Scotland, you get to vote when you're 16. And that puts a bit of pressure on us as MSPs, because you really have to think about young people who are still at school, because they get a vote. And if they don't want you to be elected, they'll vote for somebody else. So it enables our schools, as was just mentioned, to get involved, but everybody has to be in the room. It's not just one party. And that goes to a point we had in our group about you need to have an open democracy where people are not discriminated against on age or gender or what ethnic background they come from. So the inclusivity is really important. So some really good feedback there. We're slightly late, but only 5 minutes, which I don't know about you guys, but that's not too bad given when we started. But I'm really looking forward to the next session, because that's going to be Finn Strivens is going to give us an overview of the School of International Futures ideas about a national strategy for the Next Generations programme. And he's going to invite some of the Next Generations champions who are involved in the programme and are in our event today to speak at the end of the presentation. So that's really good. That's going to tick 2 boxes. So really looking forward to hearing your presentation, Finn. Over to you.
Thanks so much. I'm actually going to ask Lewis to kick off, and then I'll come in a few slides in.
We're going to do a good double act, rattle through these. So yeah, hi everyone. A national strategy for next generations is an example of one kind of model for trying to involve youth voices, but do it in an intergenerational way, where we're trying to sort of make sure that the whole of society is included in a big dialogue about the future of the UK and its role in the world. It is a program that we've been running with a coalition of partners for a few years now. We've got nearly 50 young people who are involved in going out in their communities and working on this, and we have lots of links with people within the UK government and in Parliament where we're trying to feed in stuff that's coming out of our program into the work that they are doing. The origins of this program really came from a discussion with those partners where we concluded between ourselves that we need to change the way the UK makes decisions about its future and how it's going to operate in the world. And specifically, those decisions need to be systematically informed by a real understanding of the UK's history and the legacies of that history. It needs to be long-term, have a very robust impression of what the future looks like, so that decisions can be made that could be really significant and last with impacts that could last for generations. Because at the moment, it doesn't really feel as though government has that. And we want it to be whole of society. So as I say, we want to bring young people, old people, communities across the country all together around a shared vision of what that future should look like, and making sure that their values and lived experiences feel as though they have been fed into these decisions. Because I think one of the other things that is an issue in UK politics, and I suspect is true in other places too, is sort of a bit of a loss of political trust and political engagement at the moment. So one of the things is trying to get people back engaged in these decision-making processes and feel as though they can shape them and shape the future of their country. And one of the real critical elements for doing that we've got at the bottom is doing it in a connected way. So really making sure that's connected into government in a sustainable and robust fashion, that people can, they can really feel that they're having an impact here. So how we're doing this currently is we're building on 3 pillars. So you can see on the left-hand side, we've got training and supporting young people to use foresight for systems change. So we've been developing a network of next generation's champions. There are nearly 50 of them now, and we've been training and supporting them in foresight and in leadership and advocacy to go out into their communities and do the top of these 3 pillars, to lead these intergenerational dialogues and visioning exercises with their peers, but also with people who are older than them, potentially colleagues, potentially family members, potentially people who are part of community groups that they're in, and really try and capture the insights from their communities, and then take those insights into the bottom pillar on the right and connect them into government and parliament. So just to give a little bit of a more concrete indication of how this is working, as I say, there are lots of different ways that we're trying it, but in terms of having those intergenerational dialogues, we've been working with this network of young people. They've been going into their communities to do this. So that's on the left here. In the middle, in terms of the training, we've been running sort of foresight training sessions with them. This weekend, we're actually going to have a leadership retreat with the network, which I think Ben and I are both really excited about, and hopefully some of the champions are also really excited about. And as well as having ongoing engagement with relevant teams and departments in government and with MPs, we have been developing a tool called Future Check, which is a mechanism for enabling citizens to assess new policies or pieces of legislation that are being considered for the impact that they're going to have long term, and make sure that that impact is fair. So this is a repeatable tool that we could imagine being used in lots of different contexts. So yeah, that's one thing that we're piloting. And I think at that point, I'm going to hand over to Finn to talk about what we've been doing so far this year in a bit more detail.
So I'm just going to, in 2.5 minutes, share some of the insights coming out of our most recent national dialogues. So we had 26 next generation champions piloting this approach, hosting 46 intergenerational conversations around the country with over 200 people. Now, of course, the ambition here is to develop the infrastructure and the method, which will then allow this to scale as a process and be really nationally representative. So on the next slide, we tried to take a values-driven approach to these conversations, which involved using this special foresight tool, which is based off mindsets, each of which relates to a section of values. So we've got the purple mindset about exploratory and challenging new ideas, the blue mindset much more around structure and order, the red mindset around competition, and a green mindset around connectiveness, responsiveness, and flexibility. And this method acknowledged that values are the precursor to trends. So if we can understand how values are changing over time, then we might be able to understand how these will manifest into behaviours, new opinions and new constituencies within people in the UK. And the top line insight was really this transition that we saw happening, that intergenerational conversations explored the past of the UK's values. And this is really how they saw that orientation of the past on the left. And they saw this transition really to the growing of these sort of green and purple values at the expense of blue and red value systems of the past. Slightly more concretely, we also on the next slide identified sort of individual values that were drawn out from these conversations, such as consistency internationally, or the importance of international community, a sort of definition of leadership around ambition. And each of these values, the conversations started to recommend various behaviours that would exemplify these values in the way the UK behaves. So finally then, looking across all of the conversations, there were 5 cross-cutting messages that came out, and we'd really like to hear your thoughts on the approach, as well as some of these insights coming out and how they resonate for you. So there's this idea of leading on ambition rather than competition, so a role for the UK across all of these topics, but driving ambition rather than just focusing on individual prowess. Deepening collaboration into community, so really having much less transactional relationships and building shared visions. Moving from caution into prudence. So the idea was that the UK's sort of academic prowess as well as complex history put us in a well-placed space to steward change for the long term. And the idea that we need to get our own house in order domestically with this stability in order to present a consistent international front, as well as embedding inclusion in everything we do across all the different values and pillars that we're working on. And now we'd like to just introduce 2 of our champions who are involved in running these dialogues to just get 30 seconds each on their take from running their dialogue. Should we start with Elle?
Yeah, thank you. So Lewis made a great point about young people feeling disconnected from politics. And if we consider Maslow's hierarchy of needs, the pandemic and cost of living crisis only widened the wealth inequality. So how can young people even begin to think they can make a change or have a voice if basic needs aren't being met? Then, of those who do feel able to speak up, I found it really concerning how much reassurance really needed to be given that their personal identifying information won't be shared apart from their age and where they live. And it just seems to me that so many young people that do want to have a voice are now afraid of having a voice. And lastly, it really highlighted to me that the older generations really seem to emphasize that these issues are either left-wing or right-wing, they're either conservative or Labour. And as such, those issues are only going to be solved in those 2 divided parties. But the people I spoke to really seem to care more just about right and wrong, and therefore it's more important than ever that they have a place at the table too. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Baz.
Brilliant. So yeah, I completely agree with everything that Elle said. So just to add to that, what was extremely striking to me was the fact that young people in particular were not only extremely dissatisfied with current policy making, but also they felt that they had little confidence in their ability to navigate the future policies that were going to be made and the repercussions potentially for them. And I think to me that is the biggest encouragement to get behind the initiatives like the UK Futures conversations, and that we should continue to pursue them. And just to quickly end it, the UN Charter promises to save future generations from the scourge of war. And I think if we are going to take the necessary steps to do so, then we need to begin with these sorts of initiatives in order to make sure that young people do have a voice and that they can be taken seriously. So thank you very much.
Thank you both so much for those really powerful contributions. Sarah, I'll pass back to you then. And Lewis, I believe you can share the slides for the next activity.
Yeah, that was excellent, because that sets us up really well for our second discussion. But I have to firstly apologise because I did not pick up group 5. And just for the record, if you're all good at multitasking, you will see the answers to the 2 questions that Isabel Lawson has put in the chat from group 5. And I will say to group 5, I'll not miss you out in the next feedback. You will get to go first. So thanks for doing that for us. We're now going to go to a breakout, and here's our issues. If you're 1, 3 and 5, what do you think of the approach? How might it be applied in other contexts? And if you're 2 and 4, what did you think of the outputs? Does that sound useful to you? And does that link in with your impression of what the UK's role in the world should be? So you get to decide what the answers are. So we're going to go in our 5 groups now. And this time we've got 15 minutes, I think. So the system will just move us into groups. Thank you.
Where exactly does it fit?
We're a non-profit organization. We're sort of international, but I will send you a message in the chat because I know Sarah will want to move on to some feedbacks, and maybe if we have time, Kat can give us a little intro.
No problem. Sorry.
No worries at all.
Part of the benefits from doing this is networking and people getting in touch with each other they didn't know before. And I'm sure it's something Stephen will say at the end. We will be able to contact each other after this event. So yeah, keep that conversation thought alive. Now I'm going to go to group 5 first to give us their feedback. So who in group 5 would like the feedback this time? Because I'm still feeling a bit guilty.
That's going to be Sarah too from us. Thanks.
Hello. So I'm representing the group 5, and based on our responses and discussion, we went with the odd numbered group, whereby we discuss our individual differences and different tailored requirements of countries and regions that we are coming from, whereby some people agreed the method applied in the UK for going for the media and the likes might not be applicable in some other Commonwealth countries. And we brought into discussion of taking note of the cultural differences, whereby we can have tailored youth parliaments that understand their environment, their culture, and the people before they can have confidence in leading and also contributing to enacting policies. Thank you.
Thank you for that. I'm going to take groups 3 and then group 1 because you were all doing the same questions. So group 3, do you want to give us an answer?
Yeah, I'm conscious, first of all, sorry, I'm aware that David got cut off just as we were coming back. So apologies to David. And we didn't manage to nominate anyone, but I'm wondering if I could cheekily nominate Isabel to perhaps share back without just dropping you in it.
Yeah, sure, that's not a problem at all.
Yeah.
The key bits that we really discussed were the retreats and the training aspects, giving young people the tools to really effectively use their voices. We discussed that quite often young people are told that, as was mentioned before, that because they're young and they don't have as much experience, that their experience is not valid, which is not true. And trying to give young people the platforms and the trainings to know how to effectively use their voice to be heard. So those retreats were something that our group discussed that would be a really effective thing to implement somewhere else.
Thank you for that, Isabel. That's really good. And group 1, who'd like the feedback from group 1?
I can go. So Alvin highlighted a really important aspect, which was what if other countries implement these dialogues and collect the voices from young people and intergenerational voices, but there's no system in place that want to hear these voices. So implementing the structure to actually listen and take these into consideration for policy could be very highly challenging depending on different countries and what's already in place in terms of structure. And then we also highlighted that also the data collected from these, so depending on who it's going to, that could also be highly detrimental because nobody else really wants a Cambridge Analytica type 2 situation. And then lastly, Alvin suggested focusing on youth clubs and intergenerational equity could really help moving forward.
Yeah, really good points. Thank you so much for that as well. Group 2, and then I'll go to group 4. So group 2.
Iman, are you happy to report?
Yes, but as a fly on the wall, I think I'd like to maybe volunteer Jerome. If he's unable to, I'm happy to go ahead.
Okay, if I forget something, you can just also input. So a while ago we were sharing about the aside from the status quo of the youth in each countries, no, na on how they are unable to have a platform or what are the issues faced by this youth to be part of the discussion in the community. First, we had this idea on or the sharing on intergenerational fairness, wherein the future resources or whatever available resources for the next generation are not being really taken into consideration at present. Aside from resources, also the current policies that are in place are not also thinking about the futures of impacts of this to the next generation. Aside from this, I have shared that we have shared that one of the things that resist that push away the youth being involved in the community discussions or dialogue is that the current cultures wherein the youth are not allowed, particularly in Asian countries, no, youth are not allowed to talk like adults or as in the premises of adults. Have I forgot anything, Stephen, Iman? I hope I'm clear.
You did
Yeah,
well.
I think you covered it. Yeah.
Thank you.
That's great. And then no pressure, PC from group 4. You get the last word in this session.
Cheers, thank you. I think definitely we had sort of good discussion on what we sort of realized that the opportunities are not sort of evenly spread across the Commonwealth. So the UK's experience is good in terms of sort of potential best practice, but it's hard to implement in, maybe possibly hard to implement in other regions. So the clear sort of formal structure and strategy is there to capture different voices. What we do sort of recommend is that there's opportunities to capture the ordinary voices as well. So that's a point that we made, because even in other countries, there's also not space, whether because of economic reasons, for persons to really sort of prioritize active participation, because they have to deal with current socioeconomic issues that are more sort of challenging, and they prioritize those. So it means that we miss a lot of people for that basis. We also focus on diversity, ensuring that there's both representation, and one of the enabling factors would be sort of increasing the allowances and the sort of remuneration provided, because if not, young people have to again focus on the future of now compared to the future. And what that does is sort of reinforces inequality, because obviously those who sort of come from an economic base would be the ones who basically put forward, because they're able to stand better. I think lastly is about so sorry, that was sort of adequate compensation. Yeah, I think that's it really in terms of the main points that we had.
Yeah, that was an excellent sum up of our discussion. It was really good. Thanks, PC. Well, look, it's difficult to believe, but we've actually come to the end of this conversation. And I don't know about the rest of you, but I found it really thought-provoking, at times quite inspiring. So my ask is that this is our first go at this discussion, that this is not our last discussion. I'd like us to share the slides, discuss it with your friends and colleagues, share the YouTube, and just watch introduce it so you can watch with friends, youth parliaments, have a discussion on it, elected reps that some of you will be, just to think about where you would like to take the discussion. I think getting involved with the CPA is always good, because it's the training sessions they do, I can say as a parliamentarian, are superb. Because I have to say, parliamentarians still need to learn a lot. Even if you've got experience in life, you always need to keep getting new experience and challenging yourself. It came across to me, we've got very different political cultures. So we need to learn from each other, we need to challenge each other. And I think networking with the School of International Futures, we've now got their contacts. So I think that's been superb. I want to thank Lewis from School of International Futures and Emily from the CPA. I think you guys did a lot of the heavy lifting. Yeah, so virtual round of applause, but there's lots of others who I know will have made this work. Honestly, when you're doing something that's morning, noon and evening online across the world, and it works and it sticks to time. So thank you to the speakers. And my challenge to you all is, you all think about what you personally can do to take this agenda forward. We're going to be having CPA's Youth Parliament is in New Zealand in 2024. That sounds exciting. So who's going to go to that? So what are you going to do personally, and how can we work together using the structures we've got? Because this is about making the world a better place, tackling climate change, giving people jobs, housing, good education, health, a country you can stay in and live in. So lots of challenges. I'm quite excited after this. I'm going to hand over to Stephen next, because he heads up the CPA, and I'm sure is going to want to develop from today, because it's been really good. Over to you, Stephen.
Sarah, thank you very much indeed. And can I first of all echo all of your thanks to everyone, but then on behalf of all of the participants, thank you for chairing this so ably. Honourable Michelle Slack at the beginning spoke about the innovation and exuberance that young people bring to these debates. And I think that's been absolutely reflected in our discussion here today. And at the Commonwealth Parliamentary Association, youth is one of our priorities. It is, as Kat said earlier, the Commonwealth Year of Youth. And as Sarah just said, we have our CYP in New Zealand next year. I want to highlight three things from today's discussion that I thought were especially powerful. In the reports back just now, there was reference to the importance of a system to hear young people's voices. That is so critically important. That's why we are developing our work on youth parliaments and encouraging young people and encouraging parliaments to have that engagement. Secondly, the issues around diversity, inequality, and marginalized communities. Young people are a diverse bunch, and it's important that decision makers are understanding that and listening to the range of different views. And finally, the emphasis on the intergenerational. In both of the workshops that I attended, concerns around, were parliaments listening to young people's voices on an equal basis, but also a desire for dialogue between the generations. And that's something that I know is shared right the way across the Commonwealth and beyond. So thank you everyone for taking part. Let's carry on with the networking. And I'm really, really pleased that we've been able to do this in partnership with our wonderful friends at the School of International Futures. And I'm really grateful to Kat and the team for what they've done to ensure this has happened. Thank you, everyone. And let's carry on with these discussions moving forward.
Again, a round of applause for you, Stephen. That was a really good way, a really positive way. And thank you to everybody who's joined us from the council chambers, getting really good feedback earlier, to all of you as individuals. Let's take this agenda, let's seize the opportunity, and let's give young people the opportunities that they deserve, but critically to shape those opportunities, not just tell them what's going to happen in their lives. So it's been a privilege to chair this event. Let's keep networking, and we've done pretty well. You know, we're only 4 minutes over time. No pressure. So thank you, everybody. It's been great today, and let's keep this conversation going. And everybody, give yourself 1 or 2 action points you're going to implement after today and make things happen. Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you very much, everybody.
Thanks so much.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you,
Goodbye.
everyone.